What would you do if your own younger sibling called you a whore every week for weeks on end, right in front of your parents, and no one ever punished him? Would you stay quiet and let it slide? Or would you speak up, even if it meant being seen as the villain in your own family? I'm the only daughter in a household of four brothers, and I've gotten used to being called degrading, humiliating names. But one day, when the line was finally crossed, I snapped back with just a single sentence. And yet, the one who burst into tears wasn't me, it was my little brother. My mom, who had witnessed it all, looked at me and told me to apologize. Was I wrong? Or are they the ones letting me get hurt over and over again every single day? I'm the only daughter growing up among four brothers, and that alone set me apart from the very first breath of my childhood. I've always been an introspective person, the kind who steps back in conversations, trying to keep the peace by yielding and pleasing others. I don't like conflict. I avoid arguments. I used to believe that as long as I was kind enough, people would treat me with respect in return, but I was wrong. There are two distinct generations among my siblings. The two older brothers, one of whom has moved out to live with his girlfriend, and the two younger ones, both a few years below me. The younger ones, especially the one right after me, seem like they were born from the purest form of Gen Z, stubborn, provocative, always looking for someone's weak spot to push. To them, I wasn't just a sister. I was a living emotional target they used to test the invisible line between teasing and verbal abuse. I still remember so clearly the first time he called me a whore. Right there at the dinner table, no provocation, no build-up, just dropped the word like it was a nickname. My dad frowned slightly. My mom sighed and said, "Don't say that." That was it. No punishment, no talk afterward, no apology. I waited. I waited for the adults in the house to realize a line had been crossed. That even if it was just a joke, it was cutting into my skin, into my sense of worth day by day. But as the days passed, I found myself slowly pushed out of the idea of being protected in the very home I grew up in. There were nights I'd sit in my room, hearing the laughter from the living room, laughter that often came at my expense, and feel like I was some leftover object, labeled as too sensitive, can't take a joke, always overreacting. But if it were you, if your own sibling looked at you with disdain and called you something no one deserves to be called, would you still think you're too sensitive? I started avoiding them. I stayed in my room more, buried myself in studying, reading, working, anything that meant I didn't have to sit at the same table as the people who found amusement in tearing me down. But the cruel irony was, the more I pulled away, the more they tried to pull me into their emotional battlefield. The name calling didn't stop at whore. There were other words, harsher, sneakier, sometimes wrapped in the disguise of just joking. I started talking to my mom. Not just once, many times. I picked my moments carefully when she was washing dishes, watching TV, just home from work, anytime I thought she might be able to listen. But my words seemed to pass right through her, like wind. Her usual response was, "He's going through a phase. Just ignore him, honey. I'm too tired." I don't blame her entirely. I know she really is tired. I know my dad isn't the strict father he once was either. But is it fair that the exhaustion of adults becomes the excuse for why I'm being disrespected with no one stepping in to defend me? The feeling of being the only one in your family who's treated like they don't matter is something hard to name. It's not quite loneliness. There are always people around. It's not exactly bullying. The bully is your own brother. It feels more like a slow erosion of your self-worth until one day you don't even feel like speaking anymore because you already know. No one's really listening. I didn't think I'd ever fight back. I kept telling myself he'll grow up. He'll understand someday, like the adults always say. but pain doesn't wait for people to mature. It shows up every time I look in the mirror and wonder, what did I do wrong to deserve this? That evening began with something rare in my house, a feeling that was almost warm. The whole family gathered to play cards. There was laughter, friendly banter, and there was me. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't alone in my room. For the first time, I felt like I belonged in that room at that table with my parents and my siblings. I won a few rounds. Everyone seemed surprised. Even I was surprised. I smiled, not because I won, but because I felt present, a real part of that family moment. I thought to myself, maybe today will be a peaceful day, but like most fragile joys, it didn't last long. Just a few games later, everything began to spiral. My younger brother, the one I used to call second youngest, slipped back into his usual role. Only this time I saw it more clearly. He waited until I was happiest to ruin it. Maybe to him, my joy was suspicious. Someone like me, someone he's used to mocking, used to hurting, shouldn't be smiling for too long. It started with one sentence. You look like a whore who just won at cards. I froze. My parents were sitting right there. So were my siblings. I looked around. No one reacted. My mother furrowed her brows and said, "Don't say that." And then, silence. No one got up. No one pulled him aside. No punishment was given. I bit my lip, trying to swallow the anger. But then he continued. He said I should go back to my room because no one wants you here. He said I was an inconvenience that showed up at the wrong time. Every word he spoke was like a scissor, cutting me away from that brief feeling of belonging I had touched just moments ago. And this time, I didn't have the strength to stay silent. I turned to look at him, no longer trembling like before. I said, "Just because your friend's horse died doesn't mean you get to talk to me like that." That sentence sliced through the room like a knife. The card table went completely silent. He burst into tears, loud sobs, as if I had just slapped him across the face. My mother turned to me, shocked. "What did you say?" "You need to apologize to your brother." I stood up. I didn't respond. I walked straight to my room, heart pounding, head spinning, not from regret, but from shock. Shock at that strange scene. The one who insulted me was the one being comforted. And I, the one hurt for so many months, was the one expected to bow my head. I didn't regret it. And even now, I still don't regret it. That night I cried, but not because of what I said. I cried because something was becoming painfully clear. In my family, endurance is valued more than the right to be respected. I was seen as stubborn, as unwilling to let things go, simply because I didn't stay quiet like every other time. There's a common misconception about quiet kids, that they're weak. But the truth is, sometimes they're the ones who've had to hold back the most, endure the most, and only when they've reached their final limit do they finally speak up. What I said that night, cold as it might have sounded, was the crystallization of hundreds of cuts that had never been acknowledged, never been healed. I ask myself, if I hadn't said that, how long would it have taken for my brother to realize just how damaging words can be to a person's self-worth? And I ask myself, why are the emotions of the one who insults always prioritized over the one who's been hurt? The line between teasing and emotional abuse is so thin that only the person living through it can feel where it is. And sometimes even parents choose to simplify things with a dismissive, "They're just messing around." No, boss. This isn't messing around anymore. This is a pattern, a deliberate, repeated behavior with clear emotional damage. When someone gets called a whore, despite never having had a relationship, never doing anything wrong, the word stops being a joke. It becomes a toxic label stuck to their life and their worth, day after day. That night, I didn't apologize. I only whispered a soft, sorry to my mother for making her sad. Nothing more. As for my brother, I stayed silent. I didn't feel I owed him an apology, because for the first time, after so many days of being dismissed, I finally stood up for myself. But standing up for myself didn't mean I was at peace. That night, after my bedroom door closed, the emotions finally began to pour out. I no longer had to save face or pretend to be calm in front of anyone. I sank to the floor, back against the bed, and the tears started to fall. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, choking kind that rise from your throat like your heart is trying to say something your mouth can't. I didn't regret standing up for myself, but I started doubting myself. I thought, did I go too far? Should I have held back just a little longer? If I had stayed quiet, maybe she wouldn't have cried. If I hadn't said it, maybe mom wouldn't have looked at me with such disappointment. I knew exactly how cruel my words had been. Yes, I had gone straight for her fresh wound, the death of the horse her friend adored. But it wasn't revenge. It was a wake up call, a reminder that grief is never an excuse to hurt others. And yet, in that dark room, when reason no longer shielded emotion, I was tormented by the very thing I believed was right. And that's the scariest part. When you know you're not wrong, but you still feel guilty just because someone else cried. The worst part isn't being yelled at or insulted. It's being seen as the bad person just because you refuse to be the victim anymore. The moment I stepped out of the role of the quiet, kind, tolerant older sister, my whole family looked at me like I'd become someone else. Mom's eyes, dad's silence, the quiet footsteps of my siblings afterward. It all made me feel like I had done something wrong. There's a painful truth that many people won't dare say out loud. Family isn't always a safe place to show your pain. In fact, it's often within your own family that you have to hide your emotions the most. Because if you speak up, you'll be seen as selfish, dramatic, disrespectful, or not loving your siblings enough. The next morning, I didn't come down for breakfast. I stayed in bed, listening to the clinking of dishes in the kitchen and mom calling my name, not with a hint of gentleness. Everything went back to normal, except me. Not because I was angry, but because I was tired. I started asking myself a series of questions. If I stay silent, will anyone ever really see my pain? If I stand up, will anyone be on my side? And if even my own family can't understand me, then who can I turn to? I thought about the friends I had talked to over the phone. Some said I was strong. Some said I should move out. Some just stayed quiet because they didn't know what to say. But advice doesn't help much when loneliness lives inside you like a locked room and you can't even find the key yourself. The thing that hurt me the most wasn't being called a whore or hearing nobody wants you here. It was the fact that my parents heard everything and still did nothing. They're not bad people, I know that. They're just parents trying their best under 1,000 pressures. But sometimes love isn't enough if it doesn't come with action. I needed to be protected. I needed to be acknowledged as a human being with feelings, not just the good, sensitive daughter. I started journaling again every night as a way to untangle my messy thoughts. I wrote about the fear, the sadness, the anger, and the questions I still didn't have answers to. Writing became my way of keeping myself from disappearing into the invisible role others kept assigning me. And through those pages, one thought began to take shape. I can't wait for them to change anymore. I have to speak up, no matter what happens. I started planning a conversation with my mom, not to blame her, but to tell the whole story from beginning to end. Not with anger, but with as much sincerity as I could find. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I just wanted to know that, out of all the pain I've carried, at least one person in this house truly sees me and believes me. And if I'm lucky, maybe that moment could be the beginning. Not to fix everything, but to rebuild from the start. I had imagined that conversation in my head countless times. I rehearsed every word, every breath. I was scared I'd cry, scared I'd lose control, scared I'd be seen as a drama queen again, just like so many times before. But I also knew if I didn't say it this time, I might never get another chance. As soon as my parents got home after a long day, I stepped out of my room. My hands were shaking, my palms cold, my heart pounding like a drum. I didn't say anything to my little brother. I walked straight into the kitchen, where mom was just taking off her mask and setting her bag down on the chair. She looked up at me, surprised. Maybe because usually I'd avoid her. But this time I walked out on my own. Mom, can I talk to you in private for a bit? She looked at me for a second, then nodded. We went into her bedroom. The door closed behind us. I stood there for a few moments, trying to stay calm. Then I started to speak. Not with anger, but with pain. Simple, honest, unfiltered. I told her about all the times my brother had called me names, about how it became a pattern, like a bad habit, about the sting I felt whenever she just said, "Don't talk like that," and moved on like nothing happened. I told her how many times I had to shrink myself, how many nights I cried quietly, and how invisible I'd started to feel in my own home. I don't know how long I spoke, but when I finally looked up, I saw that my mom was crying. She cried, silently, full of remorse. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice shaking. "I didn't know you felt that way. I didn't realize you were hurting this much. I thought you were stronger." That hit me hard. Yes, everyone always thinks I'm strong, but no one knows how much I've had to bury, how much I've had to endure, just to keep up that image. "I'm not asking you to do anything big," I said. "I just need you to acknowledge that I'm not wrong, that I deserve respect too." She took my hand. Her hand was warm, so warm, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel alone anymore. "We're going to talk to your brother. Right now," she said, her voice more steady. "But you have to promise me one thing. No more keeping it all in. If something happens, you have to speak up. This time I am really listening." I nodded. My heart felt a little lighter. Not because everything was fixed, but because I knew I had finally stepped out of the shadow of silent endurance. We called my brother in. He walked into the room, a bit awkwardly. Maybe he didn't know what was coming. Mom told him to sit down, then looked at me, signaling it was my turn. I didn't blame him. I just told him how I felt, the slow, aching hurt, the disappointment every time I was insulted, the loneliness of feeling like no one was on my side. I told him how I'd had to bottle things up, how I had to protect myself, and why I snapped the way I did last time. At first, he was silent, but unlike before, this time he didn't interrupt, didn't smirk, didn't get defensive. He just listened. His eyes got redder with every word I said. And then Mom spoke up. "I'm proud of your sister for speaking her truth, and I need you to know your behavior crossed a line. This isn't just sibling teasing anymore. This is verbal abuse, emotional harm, and I won't let it continue." That was the first time I saw Mom fully take my side. No excuses, no, "He's just a kid." We all sat together for a little while longer. Then Mom left the two of us alone. I thought he'd go back to being defensive, but he didn't. He lowered his head. I'm sorry. Really, I didn't know you were hurting that much. I thought you didn't care about the stuff I said." He paused, then added, "When you said that thing about the horse, I realized you must have held it in for so long. I felt hurt when you said it, but now I get it." Then he quietly got up, walked into my room, and fixed the cabinet hinge that had been loose forever, something he never paid attention to before. Then he came back and hugged me. A real hug. Not forced, not awkward. I didn't say anything. I just hugged him back and felt the thick wall between us begin to melt. Some changes don't begin with words. They begin with the smallest yet most sincere actions. The way my younger brother silently fixed the cabinet door that day, no drama, no empty apologies, was the moment I truly felt his remorse. It felt more real than any half-hearted "I'm sorry" ever could. After that conversation, nothing magical happened overnight. The air in the house didn't instantly feel warmer. We didn't suddenly become the perfect family, hugging each other every day and exchanging sweet words like in a movie. But something shifted, quietly, subtly, and I felt it. He became more silent. No more sharp comments tossed at me every time I walked into the living room. No more sarcasm at the dinner table. To an outsider, it might seem like a small change, but to me, it was a slice of peace, something I hadn't felt in this house for months. My mom changed too. She didn't just react when something happened. She started to observe, to listen. One time while I was cooking, she came up behind me, said nothing, and simply placed her hand on my shoulder, gently. But I knew it was another apology. Quiet but genuine. I began to feel seen. Not because I did anything special, but simply because I had the courage to say, I'm a part of this family too, and I deserve to be respected. But like I said from the beginning, I don't believe in sudden change. I know human nature doesn't shift after one deep talk, especially not in teenage boys, growing up in a world where social media slowly erodes empathy. So I watched, quietly. I observed his behavior in the days that followed. He still had his moods, still got blunt, but the harsh words he used to throw out, they stopped. And when he did slip, he'd fall silent the moment mom gave him a look, or I raised an eyebrow. Gradually, I learned something important. Even the deepest family bonds need clear boundaries, or they can quietly turn into cruelty. Many people believe that within a family, you can say or do anything, and it will all just be understood and forgiven. But that's a mistake. Blood is not a free pass to be hurtful. Love can't survive on biology alone. It needs respect and an awareness of limits. There was a time I thought forgiving my brother was impossible. I wanted to shut off all emotional ties to him, just to protect myself from the pain. But I've realized forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Forgiveness means choosing to release what can't be changed, so you can protect what still has a chance. I forgave, not because he deserved it, but because I deserve peace. I deserve to stop carrying the heavy weight of resentment. No one in life is perfect, not even in families. Parents are human too, sometimes tired, sometimes wrong. So are siblings. But I believe if we're brave enough to speak our pain and the other person is willing to listen, healing is always possible. I don't know how long this will last. Maybe in a few weeks or a few months, we'll clash again. But one thing I know for sure, I've changed. I'm no longer the girl who just stays silent and swallows her tears. I've learned how to speak the truth without fear of being too sensitive, set boundaries without guilt, accept apologies with grace, but never forget what happened. I've come to understand. Some things need to break before they can be rebuilt. Some relationships must go through crisis before they become strong and real. And if you, the one listening to this story, have ever felt invisible in your own family, I want you to remember this. You're not wrong for feeling hurt. You're not too sensitive, and you have every right to demand respect, even from the people closest to you. Don't wait until pain turns you numb. Speak up while you still can, because you deserve to be heard. You deserve to be loved in the way you truly need. As for me, I'll keep watching, keep hoping. And if one day my brother truly grows up, understands the weight of words and the power of empathy, then I believe this sibling bond, though once cracked, can become something stronger, more beautiful, and more real than anyone ever imagined.